Did this really happen? Is something you must have been asking yourself after watching Princess Margaret party hard with the US president. So is it true that Prince Charles was forced to leave Camilla, or was that totally made up? And what shocking fact from the 1970s about Princess Anne was left on the cutting room floor by showrunners? Hi, my name is Peter, and I'm here to dispel your doubts about the crown. It's not a secret that Princess Margaret was rather fond of the decadent lifestyle, although the part where she kisses Lyndon B. Johnson at the White House does seem a little far-fetched. So is there any truth to the story behind that sparkling party we saw on Netflix? Well, Princess Margaret did meet the president, and the dinner went on for longer than usual. What we know for sure is that the New York Times reported on the occasion back in 1965. In fact, Margaret and her husband didn't leave until 1:35 in the morning. But there wasn't even the hint of a rumor that the dinner turned into anything similar to the wild shindig shown on The Crown. Did Margaret really insult JFK or any other American official? It's not likely, though she did have a sharp tongue. One light-hearted example just how cutting she could be was when she described Elizabeth Taylor's engagement ring as being, vulgar. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but Princess Margaret did not get a bailout of $1,000 million that night. Historical data shows that the bailout issues and awkward relationship between the Johnson administration and Wilson's tenure as Prime Minister continued for years after Margaret's visit. Harold Wilson met President Johnson just a handful of times, although one thing was exactly as the series depicted it. Lyndon Baines Johnson remains the only US president who never met Queen Elizabeth II during her reign. Why? Well, this remains a mystery. The leaders did correspond on official matters, but neither of them invited the other for an official actual meeting. Not once. Okay, moving on from American mysteries to Russian ones. What's the deal with the KGB? Well, it's difficult to believe, but there was indeed a Russian spy in Buckingham Palace, and it was none other than Prime Minister Harold Wilson. No, of course not. Though it's true that there were numerous conspiracy theories and investigations about Wilson and Russian intelligence that took place at the time. The truth is that Harold Wilson was quite open towards the Soviet Union, especially in the early days of his political career. And as a matter of fact, the KGB really did consider him as a potential target for recruitment. But it really went no further than that. Mr. Anthony Blunt, on the other hand, really was a Russian spy. According to the archives, Blunt provided the Soviets with more than 1,000 secret documents during World War II. And after the war, he decided to change his career and left the world of espionage to work as the surveyor of the Queen's pictures. And boy, was he successful at that. Moreover, he would eventually be given a knighthood. But the spy was detected by the government, and the showrunners of The Crown accurately depicted what happened next. The royals' hands were naturally tied because of the fear of exposing Blunt as a spy. So, to keep the secret, Blunt was offered immunity in exchange for a confession and cooperation in ongoing investigations. Sounds surreal, doesn't it? But there's no fiction to this particular true tale. Enough with the spies, let's focus on the royal family itself and what exactly went wrong with that weird documentary in the Bubbikins episode. So, one summer night in 1969, the BBC broadcast a documentary simply titled Royal Family. And even the Queen couldn't have foreseen anything bad about it. In reality, it was Lord Brabourne who suggested the idea of filming a documentary. And if, like me, you sometimes lose the thread of who's who in the complicated royal universe, let me help you out. So, Lord Brabourne is the son-in-law of the royal cousin, Lord Mountbatten. And if that doesn't make your life easier, let's just say that the man is Prince Philip's uncle. This guy. So, apparently, to simplify all of that, the directors of The Crown decided to make Prince Philip the main initiator of the filming, which sounds wise to me. Anyway, the documentary was meant to help remind the British people about the special relevance of the royal family. And as you know, it did not. If you aren't one of the lucky ones who saw the film on air, or one of those who got a chance to catch up with the 105-minute film a few years after that, well, then all that's left for you are short clips that were specially made for the Queen's Diamond Jubilee 7 years ago. Most of the original documentary remains locked away from public use. In one of the short clips, you can see that unfortunate scene with the family enjoying a barbecue at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. Prince Philip looks so happy flipping his steaks. And by the way, Princess Anne predicted that the event would be an absolute, total, guaranteed failure. And no one listened to her back then. Actually, the palace seems to have been delighted with the documentary. At first. It showed them as a real modern family with a very busy and responsible queen. But that was before the royals heard the audience response. No wonder then that the Queen has forbidden to show the film after that. And what about the storyline with Princess Alice in the very same episode? Was that true too? Hardly. I'm sad to say, but Princess Alice did not give an interview to anyone called John Armstrong of The Guardian. The elderly princess really did live at Buckingham Palace though. But she moved in the year before filming started, and yeah, it seems like she got really close with her son at the end of her life, as is sympathetically shown at the end of the episode. And talking of sympathy, many fans were furious with the series because it showed the Queen faking tears at the Aberfan coal tip tragedy. In the series, the Queen is shown with a napkin near her eye after talking to the bereaved, but later confesses to the Prime Minister that she dabbed a bone-dry eye and by some miracle, no one noticed. Some even dug through the archives to try and find proof that the Queen actually cried. Talking about Aberfan, Sir William Heseltine, who served in the Royal Press Office at the time, revealed in a documentary about the Queen that Aberfan was one of the few occasions in which Her Highness really did shed tears in public. Another witness of the tragedy, Sir Mansell Aylward, stated, "The one thing I recall about the Aberfan disaster was the arrival of the Queen and how it made her cry." And on the day of the Season 3 release, Harold Wilson's then press secretary, Joe Haynes, called the idea of the fake tears absolute nonsense. A tricky subject, and I myself can't say there's any substance to the idea that Elizabeth was truly faking those tears. But I think we can ignore that, because that wasn't exactly the point of the episode. The showrunners took great pains to show the horrible tragedy with a very careful and meaningful approach, and they gave us an insight into the horrors that those local families went through. The Crown often delivers valuable historical issues in a really convincing fashion, but sometimes, unfortunately, the show fails to include some crucial details. And that's what happened with Charles and Camilla's love story. "Never turn your back on true love," says the Duchess of Windsor to Prince Charles at the beginning of episode 9. And Charles seemed to take her advice and tries to do everything to save his relationship with Camilla. But the royal family seemed to puppeteer the couple for the sake of the crown. Well, I mean, that's what we see in the series. How dare they separate those sweethearts, some of the fans might say, though if those two weren't separated, then we wouldn't have Diana, or William, or Harry, and that's very hard to imagine. So this story is probably the most confusing one, and it's all before we even meet Princess Diana. So what do the history books say about Charles and Camilla's relationship? Well, the Crown is correct in showing that Camilla Shan dated Andrew Parker Bowles before she met Prince Charles. And yes, Parker Bowles dated Princess Anne for a short period of time. But stating that the Queen Mother and Lord Mountbatten would organise such a manipulative plan isn't that likely. One strike against it is that the Queen Mother didn't really like Uncle Dickie all that much, so watching them plot anything together is already very out of the ordinary. And another strike is that Prince Charles broke up with Camilla before his imminent assignment abroad, since he knew that it was already on the horizon. I think you'd probably agree with me when I say that the Crown found a rather novel point of view regarding the infamous love triangle, and that such a turn of events definitely has us all hooked for Season 4, where Princess Diana finally appears. However, most of the relationships on the show don't mirror reality, and this one was no exception. And neither was the one portrayed between Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon. But let's unpack why. Timelines. Here's where things get seriously confusing. For instance, the mutual trip we see Roddy and Margaret take at the episode Cri de Coeur actually took place 4 years later than it was depicted on The Crown. And we know that for sure thanks to all those paparazzi photos published in 1976. But I get it, the series should follow all the dramas and move us as an audience, so the chronology is less important, but the mixed up timeline does leave us confused about the motives behind Princess Margaret's depression. And it's not true to say that Princess Margaret's incident with the pills happened because of her final quarrel with her husband. In fact, the two separated in 1973 before Margaret even started her romance with Roddy. Margaret's incident happened after private photos of Roddy and Margaret caused a scandal in the press, and Roddy broke off the relationship by travelling to Turkey without his princess. And to make matters worse, the tabloids of the time portrayed the princess as a predatory older woman cheating on her poor husband. By 1972, it was Tony who had already begun an affair with his production assistant, Lucy. What I can say is that the whole story is rather depressing, but at least Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon's divorce granted some freedom to the members of the royal family, as it was previously almost totally taboo to divorce a royal. And there's one more thing that bothers me about the episode finale. If the showrunners decided to show at least 4 years of the royals' lives in the 1970s, how did they miss one of the most important events in Queen Elizabeth's life during that period? I'm talking, of course, about the accident that happened to Princess Anne. In 1974, Anne was the victim of a failed kidnapping attempt, something that became a huge scandal and was incredibly stressful for the main character of the series. Still, we hear absolutely nothing about it. Is that fair? What are your thoughts about the writers leaving out this incident? Let us know in the comments, and thank you for staying with OSA.